Welcome to You Don't Know You Don't Know.
Okay, let's dive in. Imagine this. Millions of robots flying over a battlefield in a single year.
Yeah, it sounds like sci-fi, doesn't it? But it's not. It's happening right now.
Exactly. And think about this too. Billions, with the B, billions of dollars in damage from systems that cost maybe just a few $1,000s each.
It's a staggering asymmetry. We're really watching warfare change in almost real time, driven by drones and increasingly AI.
The speed is just incredible. What's happening, especially in Ukraine, feels like it's leaped years ahead in just a couple of years.
It really has. The numbers coming out of there are, well, hard to wrap your head around. Russia potentially used up to 4 million drones in 2023 alone.
4 million?
Potentially, yeah. And Ukraine around 1.5 million. That puts them in the same category as artillery shells, basically, in terms of expenditure.
Because consumables on the battlefield, wow. And then you have these really bold operations like the one called Spider's Web. The reports on that suggest, again, billions in damage from these incredibly cheap drones. This isn't theoretical future stuff. It's shaping conflicts today.
Right. So that's our mission for this deep dive, really. We want to unpack what's going on. We've gathered a whole range of sources.
What have we got?
Well, there's a research paper looking deeply at AI and weapon systems, detailed analyses of the actual drone war in Ukraine, news reports on that specific Spider's Web attack, and even a look at how drones are popping up in, popular culture.
Interesting. So the goal is to pull out the key insights, understand the big developments, the risks, what it all means.
Exactly. What does this rapid change mean for conflict and, I guess, for society more broadly?
So we'll explore the innovation race, both sides in the Russia-Ukraine conflict adapting incredibly fast.
Yeah, the different paths they're taking.
We'll dig into the tech a bit, how AI is starting to integrate into these systems.
And we'll look closely at how an attack like Operation Spider's Web, how it was actually pulled off using some surprisingly simple but very clever concealment methods.
And then connecting it all back, how these flying and sailing and even driving robots are filtering into our sort of collective imagination.
Right. It's not just military tech talk. It's about how knowledge spreads, how fast people and organizations adapt, and even how pop culture plays a role in shaping perceptions.
Okay, let's start with the scale. Ukraine. It's genuinely being called a drone war.
It really is. The sources hammer this point home. A lot of the fighting is literally drone versus drone.
And the numbers you mentioned in millions a year, they just underline how central these things have become. They're filling a gap, right? Maybe replacing artillery where it's scarce.
That's a key point, especially in the current phase, which is very attritional, very stationary. Breakthroughs are incredibly hard.
So drones fill that space.
They saturate it. They provide constant ISR intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, a persistent eye in the sky. Overwatch. It makes any kind of movement incredibly difficult and dangerous.
Yeah, and there's that one anecdote in the sources, really stuck with me. Captured soldiers saying they hadn't actually seen an enemy soldier like face-to-face on the front line before being captured.
That paints such a stark picture, doesn't it? It suggests they might be fighting, maybe even surrendering to machines.
The human element is becoming mediated or even removed from direct contact in some cases.
It really underscores the shift. The physical interaction is increasingly via remote control or potentially autonomous systems.
So looking at Ukraine's side of this innovation story, it's pretty remarkable, like a case study in rapid adaptation.
Absolutely. They started, remember, even before 2022 with soldiers just buying commercial drones off the shelf.
Like DJIs.
Yeah, expensive DJI Mavics, mainly for basic ISR because they just needed something. That grassroots demand then really pushed domestic manufacturers to start developing their own stuff.
So it wasn't a big planned military program at first. No, not initially. It was soldiers solving immediate problems with available tech. And then with the full-scale war, the FPV drone just exploded onto the scene.
Oh, the FPVs. First-person view. These are the really cheap ones, yeah. A few $100, short range, flown with goggles.
Exactly. Low cost, readily available parts, perfect for mass deployment, and frankly, high attrition rates. And they've evolved incredibly fast.
How so?
They're getting physically bigger, moving from standard 7-inch frames up to 10, even 13-inch frames. Why? To carry more
More explosives? Or other gear?
Both. More payload, more equipment. It turns the FPV into this kind of universal platform. You just swap out the module. Maybe it's carrying bombs, maybe better cameras for ISR, maybe it's acting as a signal relay.
Super adaptable. But what about jamming? Electronic warfare must be a huge issue.
Massive. Constant jamming, spoofing. It's a relentless electronic battleground.
Right.
Which led Ukraine to a really interesting, almost counterintuitive solution. Fiber optic drones.
Using a physical cable, seriously. Yep.
A physical wire schools out behind the drone. It sounds low-tech, but it gives you a secure, unjammable connection.
What's the trade-off? Payload, range.
Payload is definitely reduced because of the cable weight, but they claim ranges up to 40, maybe 50 kilometers with perfect signal quality. And interestingly, the sources note the Russians were also pretty early adopters of fiber optics at scale, both sides facing the same problem.
So both sides are innovating in response. What other Ukrainian systems stood out?
Well, there are the Baba Yaga drones. These are big agricultural multi-rotors, basically repurposed as heavy night bombers.
Okay.
And mothership drones, larger fixed-wing aircraft that fly longer distances, then release smaller FPVs near the target zone, while also acting as a comms relay.
Getting sophisticated. What about reaching deeper into Russia?
That's where their long-range strike drones come in, like the Lu-Yuti and Bober. These seem to have evolved from modified commercial plane designs. President Zelensky himself claimed a range of up to 3,000 kilometers for some systems.
3,000 kilometers, that's deep. It's a strategic capability, absolutely. Sources also mention, more quietly, things like turbojet-powered missile drones still classified in dedicated drone interceptors, like the Sting system, specifically built to hunt Russian Shahids.
And we can't forget the sea drones. That seemed like a major Ukrainian breakthrough.
Huge impact. The big problem was always reliable communication over water, far from shore. Integrating Starlink's satellite internet basically solved that.
Right.
So we saw types like Sea Baby and Magura develop quickly. They started as retrofitted jet skis or boats, but now they're more custom designs. And they've inflicted really significant damage on the Russian Black Sea fleet. Ranges are up to 300, 400 kilometers.
That asymmetry at sea has been very noticeable. What about ground robots, UGVs?
They've shown up later, seem generally more expensive and technically challenging to operate effectively on the complex battlefield.
So what are they useful for?
Right now, mostly logistics. Think resupplying trenches, evacuating wounded soldiers. They often use commercial parts to keep costs down. Mining and demining are other key roles.
But not the, killer robot tanks we see in movies.
Interestingly, no. The offensive combat UGVs, the ones with guns mounted on them, sources say they're currently the least useful. Big challenges with stabilization, target acquisition, just operating precisely in that environment. It's ironic, given the public image.
So the tech is impressive, but maybe the real Ukrainian secret sauce was how they managed the innovation process itself.
I think that's a huge part of it. The government shifted its role. Instead of trying to lead the development from the top down, which is often slow in traditional militaries, they became an enabler.
What does that mean in practice?
Streamlining procedures like crazy, procurement especially. Getting a new drone system tested, evaluated, selected, and contracted could apparently happen in just a week.
A week? Compared to what, years in the US DoD?
Potentially, yeah. It's an unprecedented speed, driven by urgent need.
But surely that creates problems too. All these different systems from tiny manufacturers flooding in.
Oh, absolutely. It led to what the sources call a zoo of technology. Hundreds of different drone types, different controllers, different software, interoperability nightmares.
So how do they address that?
Their solution, implemented in 2024, was creating the Unmanned Systems Forces, a dedicated military branch, the first in the world, specifically for drones and related tech.
What's their job?
To try and tame the zoo, essentially. Collect lessons learned, share knowledge about what works, standardize guidelines, integrate drone operations into overall military doctrine. It's about institutionalizing that initial burst of rapid, chaotic innovation.
That makes sense. You need structure eventually to sustain it. And this innovation directly led to things like Operation Spider's Web.
It certainly enabled the kind of thinking and capability behind it. Sources call Spider's Web a defining moment, a real signal event. Not just because it worked, but because of the sheer audacity and cleverness.
What was the problem they were trying to solve with this?
The constant, massive, long-range Russian missile barrages, launched by bombers like the Tu-95, taking off from bases deep inside Russia, far beyond the reach of Ukraine's regular air defenses.
Yeah, the source mentioned the chilling detail, people in Ukraine getting countdown alerts on their phones when those bombers took off.
Exactly. knowing an attack was imminent, but often being unable to stop the launch platform itself. And Russia wasn't static. They'd been improving defenses against earlier long-range drone attacks.
Like what?
Better air defense coverage around bases, hardened shelters, decoys, even putting old tires on bomber wings to try and disrupt drone targeting systems, made conventional drone strikes much harder.
So Ukraine needed a new approach. This Operation Spider's Web, was it super secret?
Extremely secret, apparently. Reports say they didn't even grief the Americans. Overseen directly by President Zelensky, the core idea. Forget large, easily detectable drones. Sneak small drones deep into Russia, get them close to the air bases before launch. Surprise was key.
How did they sneak them in?
This is the really clever part, according to the reports. They used ordinary shipping containers.
Like standard cargo containers.
Exactly. Turned them into, as one source put it, sophisticated weapons delivery systems. It was like a Russian nesting doll designed drones hidden inside, with remote-controlled roofs on the containers that could pop open for launch.
Wow. Hiding in plain sight.
And the claimed location for the operations HQ just adds to the story, supposedly right across the street from Russia's main internal security service, the FSB, in Russia, though that's a Ukrainian claim. It involved a whole network, agents, spies, soldiers, remote pilots.
Complex operation. What about targeting? How did they make sure the small drones hit the right spots on these huge bombers?
They apparently used decommissioned Soviet-era bombers, the same type, sitting in a museum in Ukraine.
For target practice.
Not exactly practice, but for training new machine learning algorithms, feeding the AI images, teaching it to recognize the most vulnerable points, fuel tanks, engines, critical components.
AI was involved in the targeting.
In the recognition and final guidance phase, yes, according to these reports. Then came the attack itself. The order given, container roofs slide open, drones launch simultaneously from multiple hidden locations, then reports of explosions at airfields thousands of miles inside Russia. There was even drone footage released, apparently showing bombers on fire, one drone diving towards another plane. Pretty dramatic stuff.
And the impact. Did it work?
Damage was confirmed on multiple Russian strategic bombers and other aircraft. Now, the exact numbers differ between Ukrainian claims and Western intel assessments, but damage was done.
And critically, the cost-benefit ratio was huge.
Absolutely massive. Billions in potential damage, maybe a replacement cost, inflicted by drones costing just a few $1,000s. And remember, these weren't just any planes. They were part of Russia's strategic bomber fleet, the ones capable of carrying nuclear weapons.
And they aren't making new ones of those specific types.
Correct. So losing even a few is a significant blow. Beyond the physical damage, the sources stress the attack's significance as an evolution in a revolution, meaning it forces every military in the world to rethink force protection. How do you defend against cheap, numerous, cleverly deployed drones? Where do you invest? The analogy used was the V-1 and V-2 rockets in WWII. They didn't just win the war, but they signaled the dawn of the missile age. This might be similar for autonomous systems.
The timing was also mentioned as significant.
Yeah, it apparently came after some discussions where the perception might have been that Ukraine had run out of options or had no cards left in negotiations. This demonstrated they could still innovate and strike back hard deep inside Russia.
What's the strategy there? Just attrition.
Ukraine's stated goal is to raise the costs for the Kremlin, make the war too expensive, too painful to continue, hoping to pressure them towards ending it. Whether this specific attack significantly moves that needle is debatable, the sources acknowledge, but it undeniably changed perceptions about capability and the future conduct of war.
Okay, so that's a snapshot of Ukrainian innovation and a major operation. But Russia isn't standing still. How are they responding?
It's definitely a dynamic process. The sources describe it as a mirror image in many respects. Both sides are constantly observing, copying successful designs, and developing countermeasures. The RDT&E cycle research, development, testing, evaluation is incredibly fast, weeks or months, not years.
Is Russia's development also shifting away from the big defense companies?
Yes, significantly. There's a growing volunteer and startup community emerging there too, which they've apparently nicknamed the People's VPK, or People's Military Industrial Complex.
Why the shift?
Same reasons, really. Faster innovation, cheaper production, focus on attritable systems cheap enough to lose in large numbers, often using commercial, off-the-shelf parts. And the sheer volume Russia is churning out is huge, reportedly outpacing Ukraine now.
What are their key drone successes?
The big one is undoubtedly the Shahed drone, which they call the Jeren. They started by importing them from Iran, but now they're mass-producing them domestically.
These are the long-range kamikaze ones?
Exactly. Relatively low cost, maybe $20K to $70Ks each, but with ranges over 1,500 kilometers. They can launch them in huge waves, hundreds at a time, overwhelming air defenses and hitting infrastructure across Ukraine. It's a major threat.
What else are they using effectively?
Various ISR drones, like the Orlan and Zola types, for reconnaissance. And they have effective mid-range loitering munitions, think Lancet and KYB drones, which they use to strike high-value targets like artillery or air defense systems just behind the front lines.
Are they still using commercial drones like DJIs?
Heavily. Despite efforts to develop their own alternatives, they still rely a lot on DJI quadcopters for frontline ISR and even dropping grenades. It just highlights how difficult and expensive it is to replace those readily available cheap commercial systems entirely.
What about at sea? Are they catching up on sea drones?
They acknowledge Ukraine had the initial lead there, but they're definitely working on it now. Copying designs, basically simple boat hulls, integrating Starlink or their own satellite comms, mostly focused on reconnaissance and developing ways to counter Ukraine's sea drones right now.
And the constant electronic battle continues. EW and counter-drone efforts.
Oh yeah, it's a relentless cat-and-mouse game. Attack, counterattack, counterattack. Russia uses a layered approach. Signals intelligence to detect drone signals, widespread jamming to disrupt them, and then kinetic defenses, guns, missiles to shoot them down.
Has their EW approach changed?
One key development is the shift towards smaller, portable EW systems, what the sources call trench-level warfare EW.
Why the change?
Because the bigger vehicle-mounted jammers were becoming prime targets themselves. Too easy to spot and destroy, so now you see individual soldiers carrying backpack or handheld jammers.
And the source mentioned soldiers carrying shotguns, too, for drones.
Yeah, it sounds primitive, but it's necessary. Shotguns can be effective against small, close-in drones, especially fiber optic ones that aren't affected by jamming, or drones specifically designed to home in on jamming signals. You need a physical countermeasure.
Communication seems to be a persistent problem for both sides, leading to drones getting shot down by their own side.
Yes, drone fratricide is apparently a significant issue, contributing to the high loss rates. Coordinating all these systems in a chaotic electronic environment is incredibly difficult. Russia is pushing hard for better training and standardization of EW and counter-UAS tactics, but the quality is reportedly uneven because of that mix of official military tech and the newer stuff from the volunteer groups.
Okay, let's pull back again and bring in the AI dimension more directly, using that research paper as a guide. It framed AI integration into weapons as a truly pivotal moment in warfare history.
It really did. Characterized by rapidly accelerating capability decision-making that's often hard to understand, sort of black box and falling costs.
So connecting that theory to the battlefield in Ukraine, what specific AI capabilities are we actually seeing deployed right now?
The main things seem to be autonomous navigation, especially for that final last-mile approach to the target and automatic target recognition, or ATR.
Using computer vision.
Exactly. The drone's own computer analyzes the camera feed, identifies a pre-programmed target type, like a tank or artillery piece, and locks onto it. The analysis happens on the drone itself.
And Russia's using this for terminal guidance.
Yes, that's a key application they seem to be employing, particularly with drones like the Lancet. An operator might designate a target area or even approve a specific target, but then the drone takes over for the final attack run using its onboard AI and vision system.
Which makes it immune to jamming at that critical final stage.
Precisely. Once it's locked on optically, jamming the GPS or control link doesn't matter. The source described it as being like an optical heat-seeking missile.
How does this link back to the concepts in the AI paper?
Well, the paper talks about how AI allows systems to act almost instantaneously on orders. This creates a real tension. You need systems to be trustworthy, to operate ethically, and within rules of engagement.
But you also need them to be fast and responsive enough for modern combat.
Exactly. And those two requirements can clash, especially when decisions are happening faster than human oversight loops can manage. Traditional chains of accountability struggle to keep up.
But developing really advanced AI is still difficult, right? It's not easy.
No, it requires serious resources, data, and expertise. The Ukrainian view, cited in the sources, suggests they feel they've hit a bit of a glass ceiling with their current AI development.
Meaning?
Meaning they've pushed the available open source and commercial AI tech about as far as it can go for military applications right now. Getting to the next level, more sophisticated autonomy, better decision-making would need a major R&D investment push.
And the AI paper also warned about vulnerabilities.
Yes, several important ones. AI systems inherit biases from their training data, which is obviously dangerous if that bias affects targeting decisions.
Right.
And adaptable AI classifiers, the parts that learn and recognize things, can be vulnerable to adversarial training. Essentially, enemies could potentially study publicly available AI models, figure out their weaknesses or latent spaces, and then design ways to trick or spoof them.
How do you defend against that?
The paper suggests needing diverse AI models, redundancy, not relying on a single type of system.
What about swarming? We hear that term a lot. Is that happening?
The terminology can be confusing. While Russia is reportedly training units in swarming tactics, sources suggest their current definition is usually multiple drones being directed by a human operator, working together in a coordinated group.
So not like a truly autonomous self-organizing swarm.
Generally not yet, at least not in the way some Western military concepts envision true autonomous swarming, where the drones make collective decisions without direct human control for every action.
The AI paper also talked about how the human role itself might change as AI gets more capable.
Right, it outlined a potential progression. You start with human in the loop, where a person is directly involved in every action, like pulling the trigger. But even there, risks exist.
Like right.
Automation bias, just trusting the machine too much. Or system trust, getting complacent and becoming a rubber stamp. The paper mentioned the infamous Patriot missile fratricide incident as an example of humans perhaps over-trusting the system's recommendation.
Okay, so after human in the loop.
Then maybe human on the loop, where the human oversees the system, monitors it, maybe intervenes if needed, but isn't making every single micro decision. Then offline analysis, training AI in simulations. Human initiated. More like fire and forget. The human activates the autonomous system before hostilities, sets parameters perhaps, but then the system operates on its own.
And the paper suggested that eventually human involvement might just be cleaning up afterwards.
Essentially, yeah. Post hoc forensics. The sheer speed and complexity of AI-driven conflict could reach a point where real-time human control is impossible. Humans would be left analyzing what the autonomous systems did after the event.
Which means the systems themselves need to be designed differently.
Absolutely. Designed for transparency and traceability from the ground up. The paper mentioned a concept called an activation atlas, basically, a way to log and map system inputs to outputs to understand why an AI made a certain decision after the fact.
So where is this heading? What's the trajectory?
Russia seems to be putting a massive emphasis on AI research and development, aiming for greater autonomy. Ukraine's AI future looks heavily dependent on investment, likely from Western partners. But the overall pressure, driven by the speed of modern warfare, is pushing hard towards always-on, highly autonomous systems.
This all connects to society, too, doesn't it? How we even talk about this technology.
Definitely. Think about how drones show up in popular culture. It often swings between awe at the technology and, frankly, fear.
Like that Audi ad spoofing Hitchcock's The Birds with Drones.
Exactly. Or James Bridle's Drone Shadows art project, outlining the actual size of military drones on city streets, which often shocks people. There's a disconnect. The industry likes the sterile term UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle.
But drone is the word that sticks.
It sticks, and it carries baggage, often negative connotations, linked to this idea of autonomous killing machines, whether accurate or not.
Which leads straight into the ethics and law. The AI paper really emphasized this.
Critically important. The need to somehow bake in appropriate doctrine, ethical rules, adherence to international humanitarian law right into the AI's programming.
But is that even possible? Is the research there?
The paper notes that research on how to effectively implement ethical constraints in complex AI is actually quite rare. It's a huge challenge. And the risks are immense. If an autonomous system commits actions that violate the laws of war, who is responsible? The developer, the commander who deployed it, the government. It could lead to accusations of war crimes.
So, the decision to go down this path towards potentially making human soldiers obsolete.
The paper calls it profoundly consequential and argues it's a decision that shouldn't just be made by militaries or engineers, but needs input from all of society.
Did the paper offer any, positive angles on AI?
It briefly touched on dual use potential. The same AI advancements could power autonomous cars, better medical diagnostics, maybe even AI-enhanced diplomacy.
AI diplomacy to counter AI war.
It's an interesting thought. Could AI help analyze complex geopolitical situations faster, identify de-escalation pathways, and maybe reduce the risk of the kind of hyper-accelerated AI-driven conflict we're worried about? It's speculative, but it's out there.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Looking back at everything, what's the core transformation we're seeing?
I think it's that the Russia-Ukraine war isn't just using existing drone tech. It's acting like a high-pressure furnace, a crucible. It's dramatically speeding up innovation, especially for low-cost, mass-produced systems that are increasingly integrating AI.
And forcing both sides to adapt their organizations and tactics at breakneck speed.
Right. The key takeaway really seems to be the speed of development, coupled with this accelerating integration of AI. It's fundamentally altering the human-machine relationship in warfare. The sheer pace and complexity of the modern battle space are relentlessly pushing towards greater autonomy.
And that AI paper left us with a pretty stark warning that fully automated, always-on systems might become the norm.
Unless there's a specific treaty to prevent it, like chemical or biological weapons treaties. The paper even invoked that famous line from the movie War Games.
The only winning move is not to play.
Exactly, suggesting that perhaps with certain threshold weapon technologies, the only truly safe path is international agreement to just not develop or deploy them.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a final, maybe uncomfortable thought to chew on. Given this incredible speed of autonomous weapon development, all the inherent risks and unknown unknowns with complex AI, and this potential path towards human obsolescence in combat, is our global society actually having the deep, difficult ethical and regulatory conversations fast enough? Are we keeping pace with the technology, or are we potentially stumbling towards a future where that chilling quote might be proven right, where the only winning move was to avoid playing the game in the first place?
Well, that's a wrap. Hope you liked the episode. Don't miss out on new episodes of You Don't Know, You Don't Know. New episodes every week. Like and subscribe.